Now, the host of RN Breakfast, Patricia Karvelas, joins us now. It's a bit of a hard act to follow, Patricia, the resurrection of the Tassie tiger.
I'm not returning animals from extinction, it's true.
I know, but you are a keen protector of democracy, the goddess of democracy, in fact, and there's a lot going on in Australian politics at the moment. So what's the latest on where Scott Morrison stands now? Kind of interesting to see in the last 24 hours that there are some prominent Conservative people who are pretty dramatically turning on him.
Big time. They are turning on him. I think you're referring there, for instance, to the former Home Affairs Minister, Karen Andrews, who has called for him to resign. Not everyone agrees with that view. I spoke with the former Deputy Prime Minister and Nationals leader, Barnaby Joyce, this morning on Radio National Breakfast. It was an extraordinary interview, actually. A couple of things happened in it. One thing is he did reveal that when he became Deputy Prime Minister again, remember, he re-seized that role, then became Nationals leader again. I said to him, what did you know about these 5 ministerial positions? Surely as the Deputy Prime Minister you were told something. He says the only one he was told about, and we didn't know this, was the Resources Minister. He was told that Scott Morrison was a Resources Minister. He then added that he didn't think that Scott Morrison should have used his power as Resources Minister to make that decision on that gas exploration licence, that Keith Pitt, the minister responsible, should have been able to use his power. I thought that was quite a significant statement from the former Deputy Prime Minister. He didn't call for Scott Morrison to resign, and then he said this. Here he is.
There's nothing illegal about it. Improper, well, that's a question you take up with Mr Morrison. But illegal, no.
I'm wondering, because you're the Deputy Prime Minister, why you didn't know that he was also Home Affairs, also Treasurer?
Well, no, neither the Treasurer or the Home Affairs Minister. So, that's a question for Mr Morrison. Mr Morrison has apologised for this. He himself, in reflecting on it, has come to the opinion that it probably wasn't a good move. And on that issue, I agree with him.
Not a good move. Well, I think everyone agrees with that, including Scott Morrison. The big question is, and we're waiting now for Monday, the release of or the information around the Solicitor General's advice. Barnaby Joyce seems to be arguing in that interview that it wasn't illegal, therefore it's fine. The question is, was it within the conventions of the way our parliamentary Westminster system works? Barnaby Joyce doesn't support what happened, but the legality is what he was defending. We don't have the Solicitor General's advice, I want to say, actually, Joe, yet. So we're making some assumptions and until we receive it, we won't be certain. Then there's the government, the current one, the Albanese government, and how they're handling this. So, yes, they've called this essentially an inquiry and this advice that they're getting next week. They're still out, though. They're pretty upset about it all. The Home Affairs Minister, Claire O'Neill, joined me on RN Breakfast. She was really strong, Joe. She made a couple of points which I thought were interesting, and people can make up their own minds about this. In relation to her own portfolio of Home Affairs, she mentioned that, for instance, the ASIO boss, the Home Affairs Secretary, they didn't know that they had this other minister, which is extraordinary, and she's right, it is. Then she said, how about if there was a terrorist attack? Who would be responsible for making those decisions? And how about if the two ministers, the Prime Minister, Scott Morrison, and the Minister, Karen Andrews, for instance, had been at odds? She said this was a dangerous scenario. Here's Claire O'Neill.
The secretary of my department, the intelligence chiefs, including the head of ASIO, did not know that he was the Minister for Home Affairs at the time. And if you don't understand how vulnerable that made us throughout that period, how dangerous that was for the country, then you should not be in Parliament. We just had a really good example on the weekend in Canberra, a very distressing situation at Canberra Airport where there was a shooter in the airport. What would have happened on that day if there had been 2 ministers for Home Affairs, potentially 2 people with the same powers having different views about how such a situation should be handled?
So her mounting the argument about why this was such a serious situation that Scott Morrison put the nation in. I interviewed John Howard this morning, the former Prime Minister. He, of course, was on 7:30 last night as well. But he was, I always think, and I've known John Howard a long time, he's always the chirpiest in the morning. He's like me, he's a morning person, and he's quite expansive. He said yesterday he spoke to Josh Frydenberg, for instance. I can also reveal that Scott Morrison called Josh Frydenberg, that's me pretending to have a phone, and apologised for not letting his own treasurer know that he was also the treasurer. Pretty weird. Every time it comes out of my mouth, it's so shocking and odd.
And John Howard's position on this is it's something he would not have necessarily done. But also he's saying, he seems to be suggesting this will eventually blow over and it's a big political hoo-ha.
Yeah.
And so
He says it's not a constitutional crisis, that Anthony Albanese's, making a big deal about it because basically he's making political hay with it and people want him focused on the problems in the country. Guess what? I agree with him that people want the Prime Minister focused on the problems in the country. I suspect that they also want the democracy to function well too. Like, you can walk and chew gum. So that's his view. And then, hooly-dooly, okay, then we get on RN Breakfast quite an interview worth listening to on the ABC Listen app. This is Senator Jackie Lambie. Just listen to her.
Yes, I do. It's disgraceful in what he's done, honestly. But what I find even more disgusting this morning, PK, is that here's Karen Andrews, who stuck her neck out and called for what should happen, which is him to resign. And once again, the Liberal men are standing there on the other side and not supporting her. I just find this disgusting. If I say this to Peter Dutton, if you think you're going to exist in 3 years' time and you think this is acceptable behaviour, mate, you really need to go and have a good look at your leadership, because this is not acceptable behaviour. Coming in over the top, not running this stuff through Cabinet. I mean, this bloke's a control freak.
So that's Senator Jackie Lambie, who backed Karen Andrews, the former Home Affairs Minister and a Liberal frontbencher, in her call for Scott Morrison to resign. So different views on whether Scott Morrison should resign. Scott Morrison, of course, has made an apology, a very long essay he's published on his Facebook. Well, why does all this matter? Well, because there are going to be obviously processes that develop in coming days. There's lots of things we don't know still, Joe, and I think that that call from Jackie Lambie was actually really strong. It shows that there is a lot of rage abroad, like across the Parliament, about the way that this happens.
Conservative commentariat as well.
Oh, yeah, big time. You're thinking of Peter Credlin, Andrew Bolt. They're all, if you read their columns or across what they're saying, they're all pretty angry. Remember, Conservatives, right? The concept of being a Conservative is defending the system, the checks and balances, the conventions. And what Scott Morrison did was violate that system. So,
but John Howard didn't necessarily seem to think so.
Well, if you read between the lines, and maybe I'm reading tea leaves and people will disagree or not, he didn't call for Scott Morrison to resign, and that's because, my own analysis is that John Howard is always Liberal Party first, and he thinks it will be damaging for the Liberal Party to have a by-election right now, right? It's not in the political interests of the Liberal Party, he thinks. Yeah. He does, however, say he never did it.
Yep.
He doesn't think it's a very good idea, doesn't think it should have happened. He's not exactly said that this is like a really good idea to appoint yourself secretly to ministries. So he just hasn't called for him to resign, and he thinks that Anthony Albanese is exploiting the issue politically. Joe, I just want to say, of course Anthony Albanese is exploiting this issue politically. It doesn't also mean that it was the right thing to do or that it shouldn't be scrutinised. Both things can actually be right.
Okay, and are you printing another column today? It's not often that we see a printed column from you, Patricia. We got one yesterday. Are you going to take that up
Joe,
now?
Since I have this opportunity, I actually do have a fortnightly column for the ABC news site. I published a story on an analysis piece on Saturday as well. So get onto that one too, on women and representation and our Parliament needing to be more diverse. I don't know. Let's see. If something amazingly spectacular develops today, I will burst into print.
Good stuff. Okay, great to have a chat, PK.
See ya.